Thank you for joining us today. I'm Alexandra Evreinoff. I'm Managing Director at Involve. In today's conversation, as you know from actually registering for the event, we'll discuss best practice on data collection. And we will start by introducing our own perspectives from our respective companies. So myself from Involve, David from HR DataHub, and Helen from Amey. And then we will follow with a discussion around some questions that you will hopefully submit on data collection. So please do feel free to submit your questions via the chat box during the conversation. And our lovely Fran in our team will select a few questions for us to then have a bit of a discussion throughout basically the session today. So actually, David and Helen, could you please go ahead and introduce yourselves? Helen, would you like to start? Oh, sorry.
Go on, Helen, ladies first.
Thank you, David. I am a technical director for inclusion at Amey, a large infrastructure business within the UK, where I have developed and led Amey's award-winning, we won 2 awards last year, Embracing Difference Inclusion Strategy. I introduced an inclusion ambassador network back in 2020 to enhance employee engagement. I support our affinity groups, facilitate a calendar of inclusion events throughout the year, work with recruitment to diversify our employee base, work with comms to ensure that all the great work we're doing is visible to our employees, but also to the outside world to try and attract more diversity into our business. And I'm quite passionate about improving our diversity data set. People get a bit bored of me going, come on, let's do this again, as it's the backbone behind all of the planning and strategy decisions that go into our inclusion strategy. Thanks. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Helen. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. David Whitfield. I'm the CEO and co-founder of HR DataHub. A large part of what we do is around D&I data, helping companies in terms of how they collect it, how they analyze it, and how they make sense of it all live through a subscription, through our platform, and most importantly, putting in place actions that really matter. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that in a short while.
Thank you so much, Helen and David. It's wonderful to have you today on this call. So I'll just start very quickly with a brief introduction to Involve and basically the work that we do. So at Involve, we work on a tailored approach, and with every one of our clients, we actually start by understanding their current strategies in terms of what has already been done when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as perhaps current gaps within that strategy, and actually try to help them achieve their objectives when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So we do this in a great variety of ways, and we've been working with a large, diverse group of clients since 2013. So one of the very first questions that we usually ask our clients is around collection of data when it comes to diversity and inclusion, because really you can't understand what you can't measure. So most companies will do some type of engagement surveys, and sometimes they ask questions around diversity and inclusion. And usually we would suggest doing a bit more of a deeper dive when it comes to truly wanting real information when it comes to diversity and inclusion data. So in the way that we at Involve operate with our clients, we usually would advise to run a diagnostic, let's say, to really assess the position of their organization in relation to inclusion and belonging, and give specific insights into the lived experiences of their employees across diverse characteristics. And here is where I would like to highlight the importance of collecting disaggregated data to really drill down into demographic categories, tenure, seniority, different business units, different teams, and really do that deep dive into the whole full employee life cycle. So looking at recruitment and attraction, but also the data around the demographic data, for example, in terms of development, so promotions, succession planning, as well as retention. And then even at the exit interview stages, it's really important that you're able to kind of like look at the different experiences and get the perceptions from your own employees. So on top of this, all of this work, we do recommend reviewing other processes within the business. So for example, the accountability from the business as well as from the leadership teams in terms of driving the diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy and making sure that it's integrated within the overall business strategy. And also reviewing the resources that are currently in place in terms of supporting the implementation of this strategy. And that way it can also, we can have an overview and assess the levels of innovation within the current, basically overall background of information that you're getting at this point. So in terms of the objective of this, it's really to enable organizations to set a benchmark from which they can monitor progress and really also evaluate the effectiveness of current programs, of current initiatives, perhaps gaps as well that may exist, and then design a roadmap of interventions that are actually going to have the most positive impact on different groups, and really driving this equitable approach to the solutions that you're putting in place. So in terms of the suggested work that we do with our clients and our partners, we usually suggest starting with a review of HR policies and processes to really determine how inclusive they are. And at Involve, we compare this against some of the best practice that we've been collecting over the years by working with organizations that are, some of them leading in this space. And we give a bit of an informal benchmark on where the current practices sit and identify gaps and opportunities for improvement. On the quantitative data side, is very important, of course, to get your demographic data in place. But this, David will go into a more of a deep dive as well. So I just want to say this is usually where we recommend that deep dive into the lived experiences of your colleagues, the perceptions of inclusion, and from each demographic broken down into each stage of an employee's life cycle, and really looking at per team, per business unit, seniority, tenure, you name it. So we also help organizations with this and really to analyze the data and get a bit of that benchmarking, informal benchmarking, when it comes to looking at solutions and interventions that can be applied to actually respond to some specific gaps or challenges that you might be facing. In terms of the quant data, it's incredibly important, but we also want to emphasize on the qualitative data. So it's just as important. And collecting this via focus groups, listening sessions, employee forums, you name it, but giving your employees the opportunity to voice their experiences and perceptions of current practices is really, really important. And a lot of times we do recommend for these sessions to happen and to be driven by a third party. So someone who's basically detached and can have an objective point of view on the conversations that are happening and give you a bit of an anonymized report, detailed report on basically the key areas of focus and to really build the trust from people so that we can anonymize actually the feedback that is being given. So making here recommendations as well as to how to improve in those areas. And really this brings some cohesion to the whole approach when it comes to diversity and inclusion and data collection. And this is in many ways the ways that we can help actually our clients when it comes to data collection and analysis. Now I'm going to pass it over to David so that he can go over their perception of HR DataHub. So let me just stop sharing my screen.
Great, thanks, Alex. Thank you. Let me just share my screen. So I'm going to take you through some best practice, but also some really interesting research that we gathered, particularly over the last 6 months. So there's going to be a bit of mix as I go through the slides. We are sharing this afterwards as well. So all of this that you can look at afterwards. So HR DataHub, in case you don't know us, we're a people analytics benchmarking platform. So companies buy a subscription and they have access to the D&I index, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but also extensive suite of reward tools and benchmarking. So we have 150 different metrics that you can benchmark yourselves against. And we have some amazing subscribers. So we have over 150 subscribers now to HR DataHub that are obviously getting the value from all of those insights. So D&I data, what does good look like? We ran an Outlook survey at the back end of last year just to get a sense of where companies are around their D&I data in terms of how they're currently, their disclosure rates are at, and if they're going to report externally. And here is some highlights. So as you can see at the top there, 17% of companies have already published, and then around sort of 26% of companies are looking to publish kind of this year, and then a few more next year. Disability is getting better, but we're seeing very little traction in disability, unfortunately. LGBTQ+, again, lots of amazing actions are being done, but data is still pretty poor in this area, pretty understandably, given the sensitive nature. Age, nobody really talks about at all, which is, again, quite fascinating. Gender, obviously, everybody has to report, and socioeconomic is pretty new. The reporting stats for ethnicity is very poor, and I'll talk about that in a second. But if you look at the disclosure rates, ethnicity is at 48%. So on average, companies have a disclosure rate of 48% for those that responded. And then it drops down to LGBTQ+, and then obviously about the same for disability and lower for socioeconomic. What this tells us over the last couple of years, companies have, and rightly so, focused on ethnicity. And we've seen disclosure rates improve dramatically. But some of the other areas haven't had quite the focus that maybe they should have as well. And we're seeing some really good work being done, and it is improving. So what does that mean in terms of reporting? So we looked at all of the companies that have self-reported their ethnicity pay gap from what we could find. And there's a pay gap database on our website that you can look at. What we found in 2018 was 24 companies reported. So in this red box here, 98 the following year, 129 in 2020. So some really good progress. And that really stalled last year. So only 64 companies reported, which was pretty poor. We know an issue around here is around getting the right levels of data in, so getting to the right levels of disclosure to report. But there obviously will be some other factors into that, which we need to look into, which is why we're advocates of legislation being put into place. You can also see that around 10 to 12% is the median pay gap for ethnicity, which again is pretty poor. So how are we helping companies to obviously on their data journey and encourage that reporting? We built a D&I index, which Involve is one of our partners, and indeed Amey are one of our key sponsors, which is amazing. It's an objective way of companies to be able to assess their performance on diversity and inclusion. We do this by looking at their anonymized employee data, comparing it against your peer group, and then we adjust it for regionality. We then score you out of 100 for your performance on D&I and across each of the 5 characteristics that we cover. The amazing thing we also do is we correlate that index scores with action. So you can get a list of actions that you can consider, but also more crucially, you know that it works within your sector. So it's really important, that last one. These are the 5 that we cover. We know we can get brilliant insights in age and gender. Ethnicity is getting better, but as I said before, disability and LGBTQ+ tends to be quite poor. And you basically go onto our platform and you get all the scores, and you can very quickly understand what areas that you need to focus on. It all breaks down into the 4 measures and into the actions that you need to take, and indeed we do provide further advice on those actions. But a really key part that we're doing here is helping companies on their D&I data journey. I speak to some companies that just done nothing at all. They're quite open about it, and they've said they just don't know where to start. So we kind of mapped out this data journey that we're looking to help and support companies with. And the first 3 steps really does talk about how you can get data into the organization in a better way. It all starts with true leadership commitment. I say true, so it's not just lip service, the leadership of the company is absolutely behind this. And then the second part is about building trust. And this is a step that's very often missed. So you kind of jump straight into going straight to your colleagues and saying, can you disclose your information, which just doesn't work because they don't understand why you're asking it. And it's always going to be a level of mistrust. So we advocate for a trust campaign for you to be able to run, so colleagues can understand exactly why you're doing it and why the data is so important. And to run a company census, that's our advocacy. And then you collect the data, and then you're able then to do the important part afterwards, which is diagnose. So what is actually happening in your organization, and then be able to put in place actions that hopefully make a difference, and they're targeted to areas that truly do need to be looked at. And when we look at the blockers to disclosure, from the conversations I've had with many organizations, there's probably 4 different areas. First one is trust. So making sure you have the right trust in your organization, that people understand exactly why it's been collected, how it's going to be used, how it's going to improve things within the organization. So we do advocate for doing this trust campaign. So you may run an engagement trust campaign over 6 weeks or a couple of months, which is a mixture of videos and in-person events and networking and talking to individuals, and then you ask them for the information. Also know-how. So just generally, a lot of organizations just don't know where to start. We advocate for a company census, so going out and saying, yeah, we'd like to know who the true self is. So rather than just being quite siloed and just thinking about ethnicity, going out and actually saying to people, we want to know your true selves, and therefore a company census is the best way to do it. And knowing what classifications, that's always a blocker. So people are a bit worried about what classifications to ask people. We always say align yourself to the ONS, which is a better way and a safer way of doing it. Legally, a lot of companies say we can't do this because it's illegal. That's a bit of a myth. I think if you're getting that from your legal team, I think you need to challenge, and you need to get a definitive view as to why you cannot do this, because we've seen every other organisation be able to do it. So that can be a bit of a red herring, I think. And then lastly, HRIS. So practically, do you have the right infrastructure in place to be able to collect the data and then hold it in the right way? So we see those as the 4 blockers that maybe you should look at when you're looking to collect data. And how much data do you need? Another question I get all the time is, what level of disclosure should we get to before we actually start to analyze the data? And for a long time, we've advocated kind of getting to that 70% type plus. But actually, when we've looked at it statistically, if you're a larger organization, you'll have a higher sample sizing. So therefore, you don't necessarily need to get to 90% plus. When you get to sort of 40 or 50%, and you're a very large organization, that's when you can start to do some analysis, because statistically, you have enough data to be able to do that. When you publish, that's a whole other different story. When you publish, you may want to go sort of 70, 80% plus. The other question I always get is, what are the common areas to look at in terms of analysis? And here's 5 that I kind of always talk about, and I think this is kind of what Alex has referenced as well. The first one is representation at each level. This is a really easy one to be able to do. Once you've got the data, what is happening in your organization at each level across those different characteristics? What we see too often, when I look at gender, it's incredible. You kind of have a really good representation at the bottom 2 levels, and then often cases it falls off a cliff. And that's the case across pretty much all of the characteristics. So what's actually happening in your organization as you transition from into management, senior manager, into head of? That's a really easy one. That's probably the most powerful one, I think. How long are people staying? So this is a real key indicator of inclusivity, and obviously looking at leavers within the first year. Talent movement, so who's joining, who's leaving, who's being promoted. Pay differential, so just looking at pay, not gender pay gap, but looking at pay amongst different levels within your organization. And lastly, talent areas. So we see this a lot. Stereotypically, we want to see more women going into STEM type roles, engineering roles. And that's hard. That is hard to engage with the future generation and to put in place the infrastructure to be able to get people into those non-standard roles. So those are kind of 5 areas. There's lots more, but those are kind of 5 areas that we would recommend looking at. And actions, not words. So again, we advocate you putting in place actions, but there is no link between the volume of actions and success from what we can see. So we've done lots of research, over 400 companies, there is no link. So if a company does 15 actions, they are going to be no more successful than a company that does 2 or 3. So we would recommend doing 2 or 3 really well, and putting the resources and time behind it, and actually matching those actions with the analysis that you've done, and then obviously monitor and improve. And through the index, indeed, as I mentioned earlier, we do correlate index scores from organizations with the frequency, and we give you a confidence score. So we've identified about 100 different actions, and we let you know, actually, for gender and representation, then these are the top 10 actions that you may want to consider based on the success of that action in other organizations. And then just getting towards the end, we've recently done some research on the FTSE 100. So this is hot off the press last night. So we analysed all 100 of the reports. We looked at the movement of gender pay gap over the last, 4 or 5 years. 2/3 have actually improved, and 1/3 have actually gone backwards from what we can see. And we correlated that with those companies that have put in those actions, and then we weighted them. So what we've done is we've come up with a list of 51 different common actions in the FTSE 100, and the ones that we've deemed to be more successful, as you can see on the left-hand side. I'm not going to go through it because we don't have time, but obviously we'll send out the slides and you'll be able to see those. And then finally, yeah, if you go onto HRDataHub.com, all of the calculator, all of our database, all of our research papers are all on there for you to have a look at. Yeah, so that was everything from me. I know that was quite a lot to download, but let me hand you over to Helen, who will share some practical advice and stories from her time at Amey. So I'll hand you over to Helen.
Thank you, David. I am a woman in STEM. I'm a geologist in my background, so always good to hear, that we are out there and we are growing as a cohort, so which is always good. Thinking about data, why do Amey ask employees to share their data? What do we get out of it? And for me, it really lets us better understand who's working at Amey at all of those levels, like you've both said, and highlights the gaps we need to fill to ensure that we realise the benefits of a diverse workforce. So data is fundamental to our strategy, our inclusion strategy, and we use the data to drive and embed diversity and inclusion across Amey and create a really inclusive culture for all our people, make sure we're not missing anybody. High quality diversity data enables us to accurately report our pay gaps and put in place effective plans to reduce those pay gaps. We were really pleased that we voluntarily shared our first ethnicity pay gap this January. Many businesses, as you've mentioned, David, are still waiting for the output of the government's consultation on this. And whilst there is no doubt it will become a legal requirement alongside the gender pay gap reporting. So we published our EPG to ensure that we were fully transparent and publicly accountable. We are a government supplier, so we felt it was really a good thing for us to do. The process itself allows us to better understand the reasons behind those gaps, any gaps we found, and take targeted action to address them. And by publishing this report, this information then can be used to drive positive action. It's also a really clear message to our employees about the importance of sharing diversity data and how it will be used and how you can see the benefits of us having accurate data. Employers are not required to disclose ethnicity at Amey. So the data shared in our EPG is based on those that have chosen to report their ethnicity. But our disclosure rate is at 81%, which is way above average, way above the percentages that David was just talking about for an organisation of our size. We will continue to encourage employees to disclose their ethnicity and all of their diversity characteristics, so our data is more representative of our whole organisation. We're aware that as more people share their ethnicity, our pay gap figures will fluctuate. But we felt it was really important to publish as early as we could, and we needed to get ourselves in a place so that it did take till this year. Holding high quality data this year, I think, is more important than ever because we are eagerly awaiting the publication of the 2021 census data. I had been expecting it in spring 22, but it's been pushed back. I've seen today it's been pushed back to early summer, so I'm not quite sure when that is. Hopefully May. But we're still working with data from 2010 and a few updates, so we could really do with this data. So we can't wait. What are we going to do with the new census data? It will allow us to compare our employee data with updated national demographics, but also with localized diversity data in specific areas where we work, or when we set up a new contract, when we're building a new roundabout or road or piece of railway, and we're setting up localized offices. We can identify gaps in our knowledge and our perspective and see who we need to employ via local recruitment to fill those gaps. It will also help to ensure that all of our designs, the services we provide, the infrastructure we build will be truly inclusive and fit for purpose for that local community that we're impacting. And that's a really key part of having a diverse workforce for us. However, this exercise will only be useful as long as our own data set is complete and representative. So as businesses, we all hold data on our employees. That legal thing, we all hold some of it, even if it is just your right to work in the UK, home address, bank account details, we hold data. But to collect diversity data on your employee cohort, you really must ask the individual to share personal details. And it's coming back to what we were saying about trust. This is often asked at recruitment stage. However, candidates may not feel comfortable sharing personal data at application, interview, or onboarding. And why should they? At this stage, they don't know the business. Why would candidates trust individuals they've never met to keep a check on their bias when making hiring decisions? We see this play out to its worst effect when we look at disability declarations. How confident do any of us feel to declare a long-term chronic illness, neurodiversity, mental health issues to a new potential employer? Never mind physical issues. We are more likely to brush them under the carpet and not tick a box. Therefore, when we look at diversity data sets, companies often see the largest gaps within that disability data area. However, for a business, this is probably the most important declaration of them all, allowing the company to tailor support provided for the individual's requirements, to ensure the correct workplace adjustments are in place for interview, but also when they start work, to let the individual be the best of themselves and perform at their most productive. So it's good for the individual, but it's also good for the business. So we need to get over that fear of reporting your diversity early on in your career. But anyway, to improve our data set, we need to ask our employees to share their data once they get to know us, once they trust us, not just at hiring stage. On top of this, at Amey, we have legacy systems that mean data collected from employees during onboarding was transferred to individual employee records manually rather than an automated system, leading to the potential for error and incomplete records. So how we get around this is we regularly ask our people to check their own data set. Are they happy with the information we hold on them? Is it correct? It might not be. Is it complete? It often isn't. We then encourage all employees to share their equality data as fully as they feel comfortable. It's their choice. To help us with this, we've collated details on how to update your data, why it's important, what we do with it, and provided a set of frequently asked questions. And these are all available on our employee inclusion web pages. We also provide regular reminders at any events that we put on and comms that go out, asking employees to check they're happy with the data set. So it's not just once, it's just every now and again, oh, by the way, have you checked your data set? And some people can just ignore us and other people go, oh, I've not done that. So maybe go and have a look. When then we are also able to send targeted emails and reminders to colleagues who continue to have gaps in their data to really encourage full completion. There is always a prefer not to say option in every field, and where colleagues have chosen not to share via the prefer not to say option, this is treated as disclosure and does not generate a targeted reminder email. To encourage completion, we make sure we're clear on the security of the data, that we comply with GDPR and all legal guidelines. We're a UK-based company, so it's those guidelines around protecting your data and ensuring confidentiality. We're also clear on how the data will be used, that is anonymized before it is used, that it's only used for reporting purposes, that your line manager or their manager can't view the data of individuals, and that is restricted to only those who need it within the people function. Using David's and HR DataHub's recommendation on how much data is needed for analysis suggests that our current data set and disclosure rates are good for a business the size of Amey, but there's always room for improvement. We have a multifaceted business, so we've decided to target disclosure rates associated with population sizes for each of our individual business units rather than the larger whole. And this will enhance the results for business unit analysis and better inform our business unit inclusion plans, but also results in very good rate of disclosure when we're analysing the business as a whole for pay gap reporting. I hope that was interesting. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Helen and David, for your perceptions and your experiences. So we've received quite a few interesting questions from our participants. So I would like to start with, and thank you, Francesca, for actually sending those over. I would like to start with a question for David. So David, how does one convince their organization to reveal the data? Because many organizations are reluctant to doing this, even though it provides many opportunities once the data is disclosed. And this is actually, Helen, if you want to also, share your experience, yeah, that'd be great.
Sorry, the question around publication of their pay gap externally.
So of data, actually, the question is around data.
So publishing their ethnicity pay gap externally, is that the question? Okay.
So I think it's around data more generally. So demographic data and data from surveys, etc. I believe from the question.
Okay.
It
guess
doesn't say, sorry, ethnicity.
that's all right. I think obviously if you're going to publish internally, then I think you have to. I mean, there's no way getting around it. So I think if you do run a campaign like we've said, and you've collected a good level of data, then obviously publishing it internally is really important for transparency and making sure that everybody realizes that, we may have a problem here. These are the areas that we need to focus on, and this is what we're doing about it. And then committing to publishing that every year. So not being afraid. So if things don't move as expected, then being upfront and transparent with your people in terms of why that's the case. In terms of reporting externally, I think there is no way around it. Again, I think you have to report externally for commercial purposes, because as an organization, you have to be committed to D&I and committed in a real way. And that means making sure that if you are tendering for projects, if you are looking for investment, if you're looking for talent to join your organization, the business case is absolutely there for you to be able to share your numbers and also share what you're doing about it and then your progress. So that would be my internally and externally. Helen, it'd be great to have your perspective as well.
Well, for us, we have our inclusion BI data, so we have we can drill down into the data for different parts of the business. Account managers have access to their data, their diversity data that's available to them, at a click of a button. So internally we do share quite extensively, really, so that we can almost pit one another against one another and see who's doing best, and that competitive edge is great for leaders because they're a competitive bunch. Externally, we do just publish what we have in our pay gaps, which is why we pushed forward on the ethnicity pay gap. I would like to see us updating it on a quarterly basis on our website, and there isn't really a blocker against that other than I don't know how to do it. I need some help, but I have seen lots of companies that do that on their website. They report. I don't know who looks at it. I don't know, I think it's quite a good way to focus the mind. Yeah.
And the question was about data reporting internally, actually, but in data in general. So I think you've answered that, David. Thank you. In terms of another question we have from Sarah, ONS is a challenge if you're collecting at a global or regional level. Do you have recommendations for those collecting beyond the UK?
I think from our perspective, we're just looking at the UK. We are looking to move the index outside of the UK in the future. But at this stage, the scope of our research, unfortunately, is just the UK. So I don't know if, Helen, you've got a perspective or yourself, Alex, but it's not something that I can confidently answer at this stage.
I saw one of the comments come in about how in France you can't ask anything. So there is no way that you can have one method globally. It just doesn't work. But even if you just look at the UK, there are different laws in Northern Ireland to the rest of the UK on asking people about religion and things like that. And even if you look at the demographics in Scotland, and the ethnicity in Scotland is very different to parts of, London. Well, even rural England is different to London and Manchester and Birmingham. So the questions you ask can be similar where it's legal. Let's take France out of it. But you have to be local. You have to have bespoke solutions for what the issues are in those areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I get asked that question all the time from global companies that we speak to. Can we have this on a globe? Can it be consistently rolled out globally? And the answer is no, unfortunately, because of legislation in each country and cultural differences as well. So it has to be adapted and modified for each country. And then you potentially could roll everything up to a dashboard, but it needs to be at a localized level to begin with.
Absolutely, absolutely. So a global effort, but with like localized, actually localized interventions, I would say, that need to be tailored to each specific country. That's exactly how we've been doing it as well with our clients involved. So another question from Richard is around: do you have benchmarking data with regards to targets for leadership?
And is that in terms of the representation levels in leadership?
I believe so. Yes. Yes.
So what we're doing is in terms of what we're doing around the index is really hopefully quite interesting. Is what we're doing is we're looking at sector by sector. So we're looking at for the retail sector, what is the current representation of women at different levels within that sector, and that's what we're using as best in class to benchmark against themselves effectively. So if you are a Sainsbury's, for example, then we will benchmark you against the retail peers around the level of representation in your business, adjusted for regionality. And then what we do then is year on year we'll raise the bar, so making sure that it improves. So in terms of the level, the percentage in each of the leadership is going to vary by each of the different sectors and by the different characteristics. So that is something we are actively collecting the data on, and that's something we will be looking to publish later this year in terms of which each of those sectors look like. I don't know, Helen, if you've got any insights for your particular sector in terms of what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, engineering is a difficult place to have women. The percentages are low, but they are growing. Targets are always quite emotive. We started this journey in 2016 and we put a very definite target on for 2020, but it wasn't realistic. So we set ourselves up to fail. So you need to make sure that they're realistic, so that you can almost hit them, maybe not exactly hit them. They need to be aspirational, they need to be difficult, but you don't want to be completely out of the ballpark, So it's quite a difficult thing to do, and you're right, it is absolutely dependent on sector. And when we look at one part of our business, one business unit is almost half female. So looking at us as a whole, because they're a different type of business to us, it makes our whole numbers a little bit strange. But as long as everybody is improving, then actually we're going in the right direction. I don't want to just talk about gender anyway, but that's the easy one because it's easy to measure.
And so Helen, there's a question from Charlotte as well on: how do you best report data back to employees in an easy to digest way?
I have, so I do a lot of internal training and awareness to employees and to leadership, and I tend to put a graph together. So I'm science-based, and I put a graph of numbers versus the different bands, and you can really see the drop-off. And so I've got, actual numbers, but then I've also got, generally I put percentages as well of ethnicity and gender, because they're the ones we can measure. So then again, they're not what we're worried about, but they are something that they're not all that we're worried about, I should say, but they are something that we can measure. So if we can get those right, the other things will follow, is my general belief. And it's how we flatten those curves, where you've got the drop off, how we flatten those curves. And we're doing well in parts of the business, but not all of it yet.
David, would you add anything to that in terms of like how to actually report it in a digestible way for employees more generally?
I think once you've analysed the data, once you've set in those targets, and I absolutely agree, Helen, the aspirational targets is just a really big frustration for me, because I think I love the ambition, don't get me wrong, but you really set yourself up for failure sometimes. And we know, unfortunately, D&I moves at a really slow pace, because you are obviously putting in place fundamental changes to your organisation, and it's societal as well. So yeah, I think we started on targets, but I think it's important to realise that if you can put in place reasonable targets and then some KPIs behind it, and then very simply saying to your people, here we are in representation. This is what's happening. This is the movement, and reporting it in a way that's really easy to digest. Because therefore you're getting the buy-in, you're getting the trust, and more colleagues will step forward, more colleagues will disclose, more colleagues will get involved because they can see the business commitment. That's the power of setting targets and be able to share in a really clear way in terms of how you are achieving it. And if you're not achieving it, don't hide. So I think you need to be open and honest and say why you're not achieving it and what things are doing differently.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And as Helen was saying, like there might be parts of the business that are doing better than others in some areas. And it's great to be clear around this so that you can actually have also put in place targeted solutions that are going to help, drive change in those areas. So thank you. And in terms of also another question from Jules, do you believe companies should publish the list of salaries and bonuses internally of their employees to break any of the pay gaps?
So I'll take that one. Not that I really am an expert, but I am always saying to my recruitment, we really should have good bandings on each role, because as a busy person, and often as if you're looking at a role and you have no idea what they're prepared to pay, you'll just go, I haven't got time. And often I know from experience, if you are juggling school and pickups and you've got a business that life is balanced, you're less likely to move around unless you've got a good carrot. And pay bands is something, and clarity is something that will make people actually go, yeah, it's worth me investing a bit of time to see whether that new role fits. So I would like to see that, but we get a real big pushback because nobody else in our sector is doing it. And if we put those pay bands out there, where does that put us in the rest of the sector? We don't know. So it's really very difficult. I know one of our major clients does it, Network Rail do it, and they're really, it took them years. It was quite painful, but they have banded every role, and it's really, really clear and transparent, and I love it, and I would like to work towards that.
Amazing.
100% agree.
Yeah.
I get so frustrated. I don't know why people wouldn't want to publish the salary bands on adverts, internally, externally. I mean, individual salaries is a different discussion, but at least you'd know the salary banding for every role. And one of the key challenges always will be the question, what are you on now? Yeah. So it'll be like, so the salary band is 50 to 60. Somebody's on 40, applied for a role. They say, we'll give you 10%. So we'll move you to 45 or 44. Well, actually, they should be moved to 50, which is the open point of the band. So, and what you're doing is you're perpetuating the pay gap, very simply. So, because we know that if you're underpaid, you'll continue to be underpaid because there's no substantial uplift to where you need to be. So, I'm an ex-reward professional, so this is kind of I kind of know this area quite well.
Completely agree with that too. I've got a very strong. No, we shouldn't be asking people what salary they're on. It's got nothing to do with what we're prepared to pay them,
Yes,
and
exactly.
We shouldn't be asking those questions.
No,
it's what they're worth to us.
Exactly. And internally, obviously, you'll know that information, but it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter if it's a big jump. If you're promoting them, you know they're right for that position, and therefore you should pay them appropriately. Otherwise, you're just compounding all those years of being underpaid effectively.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Well, thank you. And would you say, so I've heard this question a number of times actually. Do you think in engagement surveys too, so that quantitative data collection, should it be anonymized? And if not, then why?
You go first.
Helen, or do you want me to go? Do you want me to go?
Yeah, you go first.
All right. Okay. So I think in terms of disclosure surveys, so when you're looking to go out and get disclosed data, some organizations are collecting data in an anonymized way. So you manage to get aggregated data in what's happening in your organization, which is all fine. You can get a sense of what's happening, but what you won't find out is you won't get the granularity that you need to actually know exactly what's happening in your organization. She may say, ethnicity wise, we've got 20% representation. Brilliant. Okay, so we're well in line with the census. But actually that 20% sits at the bottom end of the organization, or sits in, in roles that aren't technical. So that's the granularity that I think you need. And if you do anonymized disclosure surveys, you have to do them every year. Whereas if you do it at an individual level, then once you've done it once, unless there's any life events or you're looking to change classifications, then it's done. So I think that's a much better way of doing it rather than anonymized. Helen, I don't know what you do at Amey, whether or not that's what you guys do.
Yeah, no, it's within our own personal employee data, which we can change for ourselves. We can update for ourselves. I agree with you. I think if you have engagement surveys and you can use them to enhance. So our systems only have a very basic 4 things that we can ask at the moment. And there are other things I'd like to ask, like neurodiversity or social mobility, but we can't with the system that we've got. We are changing to a new system this year. Yay! But at the moment we can't. So last year we did ask those questions in our inclusion survey. So it was anonymized. We thought about linking our inclusion survey to our employee records so that we could update all of that data when we get our new system. But we thought, well, we don't want people not to fill in the survey because they know it wasn't anonymous. But from last year's survey, we worked out that we have got approximately 7% of our colleagues are neurodiverse, which was something we had never asked before and we didn't know. And that's amazing, and that's probably similar to the LGBT community within our business. And yet the number who actually disclosed that on the system is down at 2.5%. So there are sides for both. I think a combination is useful, but I agree. I think your employee data that you work on needs to be non-anonymous. So is that a word?
Brilliant, thank you. And I do want to respond also to actually someone who has highlighted that there's perhaps a lack of representation when it comes to ethnic diversity in this panel, and I will say that is yes, very, very true. But the reason for this panel is actually the conversations that we've been having so far in terms of our partnership with HR DataHub. So as David mentioned, we are partnering on the D&I index, and we've invited one of actually the companies that have been part of the index to actually put themselves forward to share their experience. So Helen was very gracious to share her experience with us. And I do hope that even though there is a lack of representation, I do admit it, in terms of ethnic diversity today, still it makes sense that we held this conversation to actually drive the agenda forward when it comes to data collection. So anything else that you'd like to add, David and Helen? Just to close up.
Okay. Go on, Helen, you go first.
One other thing I'd like to think about is measures of inclusivity, and how you actually measure that you have an inclusive culture and those levels of trust. And it's difficult to put a finger on, but actually we see less accidents when we're in an inclusive space. We see more close calls and a robust safety culture because employees are able to put their hand up and say, I don't think that's safe, we need to stop work, and they feel safe and they're trusted to do that. We see higher productivity, and eventually we're hoping it will go through to our recruitment, and we get to recruit more diverse people as well, because they will gravitate to us because we've got an inclusive culture.
I think from my perspective, particularly with the data lens, is I think the opportunity is here for companies to go out and really start to understand what's happening. I think it's no longer a choice. So every company has to do this. So we have to see it. What I would say as well is I've talked a lot about data and diversity, data in particular. That's only one lens. So inclusivity, having those discussions, having those networking groups, listening to your people is equally as important as the objective data that you collect as well, because that gives it the real heart, I think, in terms of what's happening in the organization. So I just want to make sure that the data side is super important, but speaking and listening to your colleagues is equally as important as well.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for your time today. And actually, thank you all for joining. And yeah, we'll continue the conversation moving forward as well, and invite more diversity to the conversation as well. So thank you very much all for your time, and take care.
Thanks, Alexandra.
Have a great day.
Thanks everybody. Take care.
Bye.